Helen of Fourgates by Ethel Carnie. Chapter 11. When the Dead Come Alive. Lizzie Tripp, red with raking the fire, spattered with whitewash, her camise peeping through the bursted armpit of her red bodice, almost flung the moggy out of the dish in her delight to see Helen. "I've kept thinking of thee," she exclaimed. "I said tha'd come," picking up the spoon she had let fall. Come up and put thy things off, and tap Teddy's chair, for he'll know and want it yet. Two at yous were due, and one's ta'en off to tops, and he's had to go trudging after in this blanket a week and mist, and the ground on yon tops'll be like sponges that's been soaking sin the flood. Serves him reet for burying me alive. That's it, put thy feet on fender. Dear, I believe I've getten too much ginger in, now, and he said the last welly brunt his guts out. Chaps is bad to please. They sort of don't know what they want. When they've getten it, they're wrong. It comes of the Lord macking Adam without asking poor Eve, I think, and it's too late to alter it now. Just make that cat come off that fender, Helen." Here she saw Aggie stealing currants, smelt something at the burn in the oven, noticed that the cat was sniffing at a collop of bacon cooking in a saucer before the fire, and made a dash across from the table. She was, as Teddy said, like a flash of greased lightning. In a trice she banged the oven door open, removed the cake, clouted Aggie with the oven cloth, and made the cat fly into an obscure corner. "There," said the woman who was buried alive, jubilantly, and leaned back in the chair into which she had flopped after her exertions. She looked across at Helen, ghost-like in her black dress, as she sat with pale hands lying still in her lap amidst the shadows. The eyes of the two women met. Each knew that the other had gone back to their last conversation in that room. "Well," said Lizzie. The sniffing of Aggie, nursing her grief under the table, came to them. "Betty Agnes were dead, so I never went," answered Helen. "Oh!" Lizzie's ejaculation was eloquent. "So thou'rt going for'ard?" said Lizzie. "Aye, I'm going for'ard," answered Helen drearily. "Thou mun look after thyself," said Lizzie, "for thou looks white to death. There's all to do for thy feyther, I'll bet." Aye. With that one little word, cold and hard, Helen closed the door on the topic once and for all. "Martin isn't coming back," remarked Lizzie, watching Helen's face. Since that last visit she had suspected something. "Oh," said Helen drowsily. There was a remote sound in her tone. The heat of the Tripp kitchen was inducing the sleep that had deserted her for a week. Through that shadowy world closing around her, she was conscious of Lizzie's suspicions. She was amused, in a sleepy way, at Lizzie's transparency when she thought herself most deep, and at the queer fact that there was nothing to hide from Lizzie, no emotion, no regret, no ghost conjured up at that name of Martin Scott. She had reached that place where feeling is not, where no insult sullies, no love-bound enslaves, no rat rings groan or prayer. The past week her father and Fielding had been devils to her. One kept her softening his pillows, paying her by spitting at the pale face. The other had hounded her with his meaningless passion. But she had felt nothing. Feeling was dead at last. She had peace. But sleep had gone away. She was glad to creep into Teddy's old chair now and rest. "Why, she's dropped off to sleep," said Lizzie. "Shh! Be quiet, Aggie. Worn through she looks, poor lass." "It's the fire," apologised Helen, and half asleep as she was, drew closer into Teddy's chair to get away from any human pity. Lizzie threw an old blue apron over her. "Thy father's had time enough to gather 20 lambs up," she remarked to Aggie. He's a grand un. He's in Thale somewhere." She kneaded into a dough angrily, as if it were Teddy, and looked terribly at the darkening sky. Helen did not hear her voice any longer. She was startled awake by the yelping of a dog, mingling with a sad trembling cry and Teddy's boisterous laugh rolling a rich chord in with it all. The door slamming to in the wind rattled the ornaments on the dresser. "Break my granny's lustres, will Ted a great fool," was Lizzie's greeting of the dripping wanderer. "Daddy, did you find the babby sheep?" queried Aggie. Then, seeing it, she gave a shriek of delight that made the rafters echo. He had slung it over his shoulder, where it gave forth that timid appeal. Staggering into the red circle of firelight, Teddy toppled his burden on the hearthrug, smiling at his wife and saying foolishly, "We're always at home when we wanted, aren't we, lass?" Lizzie viewed him, her hands muffled in dough. "Wet inside and out," was her verdict. "If ever a woman were a fool, I did. If I'd been tied to a cow's tail, I'd have come off as wheel." "Thou'd you's dead as a doornail," said Teddy, ignoring her anger. "Aye, stiff yon, at the back of a rock among that blasted snow that hasn't all gone yet. Look after Thorpe and Lizzie when I'm gone, for my days are numbered." "Shut up, that fool, or thou whacken Helen," said his wife. Teddy peered round the shadowy kitchen. At last he found her. "Whacken her?" said Teddy. "I'll kiss her, ne'er mind whacken her. I've known her since she was so high." In trying to fix the height from the floor, he almost lost his balance. Lizzie helped him up. "Go and tumble on t' lamb," she scolded. Teddy was looking at Helen and scratching his head. She reminded him of something. He was staring over at her, where the lanky-legged lamb had crept nearer, bleating in forlorn fashion, all legs and shivers. "Have a pal outside," he said to Lizzie, sobering for a moment. Lizzie pushed him down into a chair. "He's where he'll stop then," she observed. "But," gasped Teddy, "thou fetches no drunken pals in here," she assured him. "He's sober," stuttered Teddy, trying to shake himself free. "He's always been sober." "Aye, you're a sober, but it's when you're dead," snapped Lizzie. "But it's," began Teddy despairingly. "He's no good drunk or sober if he's a pal of thine," said Lizzie conclusively. Teddy found out that he must be drunk. So soon as he got up, Lizzie pushed him down again, like a jack-in-the-box. "'Tisn't ale makes a chap drunk," he informed her. "It's the change o' air. Have a Rita's rain outside. Lizzie, let him in." "No," said Lizzie. "It's Martin," protested Teddy. Lizzie let him go so suddenly that he fell back in his chair as though he'd been released from elastic. "That great fool! Why didn't I say so?" asked his spouse. She began to struggle with the remnants of dough left on her hands. Most of it was on Teddy's wet coat. "He were on tops," said Teddy. Aye, the poor old ew's gone. When they're dead, all right, and for a long time too. Helen, whack 'un up. I knew thee when thou were a little lass with big hungered eyes and black hair like rat tails, so straight. And thou used to say, "'Tis Helen, Helen, whack 'un up." The woman in the chair sat stiffly white. She had awakened. She heard Teddy's ravings without knowing their meaning. She had awakened, she who had imagined herself dead. She could hear Lizzie's voice calling outside through the wet greyness, "Martin, lad, Martin," in the distance. She was alive but buried, horrible truth. The stoical world she had built around herself when the living earth had turned to dust and ashes had, in its turn, crumpled away from her. Martin had come back. His footsteps had awakened her. He was only a few yards away. She wanted to rush to the door, hurl herself against it, keep him from entering, to have to meet him like this. Outside she could hear Lizzie's voice, talking, her own tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. She had all the fear of going dumb that had been hers as Martin rushed away from her. She had gone back to that evening on the hillside, when she had staggered blindly through the wet grass, shouting his name. But she must sit still and smile now. What agony coming alive was. And she must not cry out, must not let them know that she was fastened up, alive. The gate creaked to the touch of those hands that had let go of hers in her need. The sound shuddered through her. She was fighting down 1,000 years in herself, wrestling with the desire to scream, and scream, till the air shouted back. She was beating with passionate hands against being walled up alive away from Martin, remembering all the time that she must smile as dead women smile behind their veils in that still, tranquil way. That was his cough, abrupt, characteristic, only it was more hollow. His feet were on the flagstones now. They seemed to walk on her heart. It began to beat, great heavy strokes, sledgehammer-wise. She was holding herself down in Teddy's chair. The knuckles of her hands were whitening in their grip. She was strangling the self that was coming alive as she sat there, trying to twist her white lips into a smile. The firelight became a dull red blur. The heartbeats were thunder in her ears now. Through the surging sound of it came the cry of the motherless lamb. The throbbing of her heart shook her to the centre. Always as she struggled against its agonized desire to burst, the scream would threaten to escape. Teddy was singing a country song about two young lovers and a new moon. The earth was rocking, a queer mist dimmed material objects. Then dazed child stirred within her. Her nails bit into the wood of the chair arms, trapped. A rush of tears came to her eyes, the first drops of a tide washing slowly up from black caves of grief. With them came again the desire to scream, till the hills shouted back the voice of her misery and shame. Panic came as she felt the stinging wet on her cheeks. She was crying. They were coming. He was coming. The lamp would soon be lit. She must smile. "Come thee out o' wet, lad," Lizzie was saying, "and get that dripping coat off." He came in. Helen could see nothing else but that dark figure. She was struggling frantically with her heart now, holding it back with clammy hands, fighting with it as with some desperate animal that was mad to live. The sweat broke out on her brow in her torment. She had to wrestle with the scream once more. He was leaning against the dresser. Even in the uncertain light there was a broken look in the old figure. The tides of chance had washed him back to Foregates, a wreck. He had done this to himself, whilst to her. She was trying to hate him as fools and cowards should be hated. "Here's another friend of thine," said Lizzie, motioning towards Helen's corner. Helen tried to lick her lips with her tongue. Both were dry as dust. But behind her eyes that tide of grief came creeping nearer to the brink. She had that to fight also. Martin's eyes were looking at her. Teddy suddenly started up, saying, "Let's our leap." "Go and break the glass, Wilter," said Lizzie. "We're millionaires, we are." "I'll light that lamp, or daren't thee attempt," vowed Teddy. Martin was still regarding Helen. He had not yet recognized her, but he soon would. She must speak, or he might think, she cared a little. As the thought came to her, she wanted to laugh. A great wave of laughter flowed through her. Cared a little. She was one great empty ache that she had to sit there in that chair, divided from him by a few yards. He was a wreck, but he was hers. As she tried to find words, the child within her moved again. She had an intense desire to strangle it, but the crying of the lamb on the hearthstone tore her betwixt rage and pity. "How's to like this sort of weather again, Martin?" she heard someone ask. Why, it was herself. She had really managed to speak. Her voice sounded, though, to have run miles ahead. "Helen!" exclaimed Martin Scott. He was off guard. The word came to her, telling her all. He spoke the word with the trembling eagerness of a starving man. Then, conscious of being too bold, he said, "It is Helen Mason, isn't it?" "Helen Day," she corrected him, hearing her own laugh come back to her ears strangely. What a world of liars and hypocrites it must be, when men and women could act so, laugh so, with their very reasons swaying, their hearts breaking. The blood was singing in her ears. That intolerable desire to scream and to laugh was on her again. In the background she could hear Teddy and Lizzie squabbling about the lamp glass. Crash! "Thin glass that," he grumbled. Lizzie sat down. "There," she said despairingly. "I knew they'd do it. Another sixpence gone bang. Chaps are noan content unless they smash in summat." Helen heard herself laugh. Then she was conscious that Martin was coming to sit in the chair beside her. It was occupied by Aggie's doll. She removed it for him. To do so, she had to half rise from her chair. Her knees felt to shake under her. He sat down. The dampness that had come down with him from the tops rose from his old coat and touched her cheek. She could smell the tobacco on his coat. "I'm sorry I broke glass, lass," came Teddy's voice humbly. "Chaps is always sorry when damage is done," sobbed Lizzie. "Sixpence." "I'll get to bed, lass," said Teddy penitently, and stumbled off upstairs. It were Thew made me get drunk." "I didn't like America then?" Helen heard herself asking. "No," he answered. He was looking at her with conscienceless hunger, eating her up with those eyes of his. They were on her hair now. "You're thinner," he remarked. "So art her," she said. "I'm as good as dead," he told her. The tears and laughter struggled in her again. Lizzie was still sighing about the broken lamp glass. "Get away," she heard a voice running on. "Field thought he were done for last winter," he'd a cough, "but I made him honey and butter and stood o'er him till he took it." She was lying magnificently, her invisible self wondering, yet applauding her own cunning artistry, which conjured up to the lonely man so tender a domestic picture. She perceived his looking at her in puzzled fashion. He was not more surprised than she was, but he made no reply. His hand tapped restlessly on the chair arm. "Now we'll have a lee and some tea," said Lizzie, getting up from the floor. Aggie had held the candle while she swept up the broken glass. Lizzie asked Helen about her way of jam-making. While she undressed Aggie, Helen and Martin sat in silence. From outside came the wind blowing from the hills. "Good neat," said Lizzie to the little nightgown figure. "No, thou doesn't take that nasty doll and mucky in the clean pillows." Aggie went off sulking. "Childer," said Lizzie. Dear, they're like husbands. Them as hasn't got 'em can bring 'em up best. I'll know about it, Helen, soon." She stopped, conscious of having let out the secret. Helen's heart was breaking her to pieces almost. She could not see Martin's face, but she sat, trying to smile, her nails at the wood of the chair again. "That can help me to make tea," said Lizzie. Helen forced herself to walk, her limbs trembling under her. The rest of the scene, the lighting of the lamp, the tea, Lizzie pushing the cake across for her to cut Martin a piece, the gossip of Fourgates, her own laugh and voice far away from her, was all a nightmare. She even asked Martin how many lumps of sugar, as though she could ever forget. At last it was over. Lizzie got her to sew him a button on. They laughed because it was sewing sorrow to his back. At last she was ready to go, standing cloaked by the half-open door, eager to run, to get away, like a hurt thing wanting a hole. "Martin'll take thee to where trap comes," said Lizzie. Helen pushed back that sweeping tide of tears again. Relief was not to be yet. Then they were out in the shadowy wetness. The Corple Stones loomed down on them, crushingly dark in the mist. The watery moon tried to pierce the clouds at intervals. "The birds will be back soon," said Martin's voice. "Aye," she replied. "No one in last year's nests," he said. "What's the good?" she asked rationally. He was looking at her again, amazed at her calmness. She knew it. It sent that wave of laughter over her again. He stood still. She paused also. He was going to mention that other life of theirs, those miserable, sweet days in that dark house. "Helen," he said huskily, "I've come all these miles to see thee. before thirst on top of me. Say summat." He paused a moment. The skirl of the wind from the tops came to them, a solitary cry. He went on hurriedly. That dreary sound drove him on. "I'm not asking much," he said, standing with bowed head, "but say summat, Helen. Just that tha hasn't forgotten, that tha wouldn't wipe it out." She was choking back those tears, wild to come to her relief, fighting that desperate heart of hers again. Far off she heard her voice, obeying that proud mind of hers, giving him the lie. "I'm a respectable married woman, Martin Scott," it said, whilst that laughter tried to shake her again. A respectable married woman, the irony of it. She saw him looking at her with hungry bewilderment of unbelief at this coarse stamp of hers on that old love of theirs. He had asked her for a crumb of remembrance. She had told him it was not respectable. With this look, which seemed to last an eternity, he left her. "Good night, Mrs. Day," he said. She moved away, dragging herself along by force. The passionate desire to rush after him, to make it up, as after their old quarrels and struggles, was tearing at her, but she could not. The gate banged after it, let him through. He was gone. She walked on a few yards, gagging herself with a mouthful of the cloak. Her limbs were tottering, the last bit of strength oozing, but she dragged herself a little further. Under her hedge, where last year's leaves were drifted, she sank down. Her fingertips clutched at the mist-sodden earth, clawed at it, even as she had been clawed, the poor bruised child of it. Convulsive sobs, ending in more convulsive laughter, tore themselves upwards from the heart to those pale lips. The whirlwind went over her, then the sobs came slower, and yet more slow. The pulse of outward grief ran down. She lay with tear-blotted face, staring hopelessly up at the darkening sky. After a time she arose, shaking the leaves from her cloak. She was talking to herself, with the habit of those estranged from their kind. "It's a lie," her lips writhed. "Nobody dees a grief." Far off she heard the wheels of the trap that was to take her back to Fourgates. She looked at the misty heights of the Corple Stones, but she had to go back. Fourgates and her man were awaiting her. Cowards ran away. She had been dead before. He had a live thing to torture now, but she must go back to her own place, hell that it was. She was a respectable Fourgates woman, going home to her honest wedded husband and to her little world, which she had made to eat its words that she had been mad on Martin Scott. As she went along, she was straightening her dishevelled garments, pushing back the wisp of hair that hung drunkenly over her brow. She had been buried alive, but Fourgates must not know